of us are looking for ways to get involved. We need volunteers to help power our democracy, ensure every voter has access to the ballot box. And so in light of that, I am grateful for this amazing group of panelists who are joining us today, who will help share many nonpartisan ways that lawyers and law students can volunteer right now and after Election Day as well, because we definitely know the need isn't going to end necessarily on November 5th. So let me get started by introducing our panelists, and then we'll dive right into our conversation. So first up, we have Sylvia Albert, who as Democracy and Representation Policy Counsel works with the national staff and Common Cause state offices to press for reforms that expand access to the ballot for eligible voters and promote fair representation in our democracy. Sylvia has more than a decade of professional experience in public interest law and public policy campaigns in voting and fair housing. She has spent her career fighting to expand ballot access, reduce barriers to participation, and combat voter intimidation among historically disenfranchised communities. She also worked to enforce the Fair Housing Act and affirmatively further fair housing while at the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Sylvia holds a Bachelor's of Arts in Political Science from the University of California, Berkeley, and a JD from Georgetown University Law Center. Next up, we have Nicholas Gothard. Nick serves as Senior National Coordinator of Election Protection at the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law, where he supports the Voting Rights Project and election protection programming through a combination of field litigation and advocacy. Previously, Nick led election protection in the state of Virginia, where he led the fight for voting rights in the General Assembly, convened Virginia's Election Protection Coalition, and managed the largest nonpartisan voter protection field program in the Commonwealth. And then lastly, we have Angie Pitha, who in her role as project lead for the Election Official Legal Defense Network, amplifies the growing need for legal protection for election officials across the United States and leads the EOLDN team in its mission of matching election officials with pro bono legal assistance. Angie brings 2 decades of legal marketing, business development, and hands-on election experience to her role and is a member of the Pennsylvania and District of Columbia bars. So with that, welcome everyone. Very excited to dive into this conversation. I thought it would be great to start out because I'm assuming that people who are watching this panel are interested in pro bono opportunities in the voting and election space, but probably aren't already experts in this area. So I thought it would be helpful to do sort of a overview, a grounding of why voting rights work is essential and why there is such a need right now. And I thought I would kick it off to Sylvia.
Thanks, Ashley, and thanks so much for having me on this panel. Afternoon, everybody. So you're here because you are interested in the important work of voting rights, and we absolutely appreciate it. We couldn't do our work without all of the volunteer attorneys who participate. This is it is a trying time for voting rights. We are under attack. And that's not said lightly. Following a Supreme Court decision in more than 10 years ago, Shelby v. Holder, we lost some of the protections of the Voting Rights Act. And the protection that we lost was that the Voting Rights Act basically said, if you have a history of discrimination, before you make any changes to your election law, you have to clear it with the DOJ, who will analyze whether or not it will affect, disparate communities, disparately affect underrepresented communities. So when the Supreme Court tossed that, what that means is that now states can enact whatever they want, and then we're fighting after the fact to try to show the discrimination and the damage. And that's a lot harder than it sounds, right? Because how do you narrow down that one policy had this effect, right? Things don't pass in a vacuum, right? It's usually it's a conglomerate of different policies that are passed together. So that makes it hard. And what that means is, there are a lot of bills being passed that are inhibiting access to the ballot. Not surprisingly, after the 2020 election, we saw a huge increase in these as well, right? So there have been some sort of peaks, right? After the Shelby decision, there was a peak And then after the 2020 election, there was another peak as we really reaching a point where politicians are trying to determine who the voters are as opposed to letting voters determine who the politicians are. So we've seen a lot of limitations in access in the last few years across the board. At the same time, of course, I want to mention that there are states who are expanding access to the ballot. That is great. But the reality is that we need eyes and ears on the ground. We need, people who can assist us in identifying these problems, identifying the effects of these problems, and being able to stop them. Yeah, and with that, I think that's a good enough overview for now.
Thank you, Sylvia. That was perfect. And then I also wanted to turn it over to Angie to talk a little bit about the things that have been going on lately that led to obviously the organization of EOLDN and why that's necessary.
Thank you, Ashley, and thank you all of you for joining us today to learn more about how you can help. I would add on to Sylvia's comments about the attacks on voter registration, participation, by saying that alongside that, there has been an attack on not only voters, but the people who run the elections in each state. And in the wake of the 2020 everything, we'll just call it that for now. I think we all know, but obviously there was a huge amount of upheaval and mis and disinformation that was fed to the public, certainly in advance of the 2020 election, but way mushrooming afterwards as well. And it was by people who are partisan and they want to see how they can engineer election results a little bit better. That's what's driving this. And I'm just going to refer to these people as partisan. These are nonpartisan efforts that we have, but the people that are trying to affect it and tear it down are coming from partisan interests. So, but I won't go further than that to identify people. I think that's adequate. But in that wake of 2020, there are more and more citizens and voters in the country, as well as elected and appointed officials within states who said, here's an opportunity to bother our election administrators, to harass them, to try to engineer them to act certain ways, to get them to ignore the law and not follow it, and of course, to personally harass them in any way possible. This project has been up and running since the fall of 2021, and the amount of coverage in the media about election officials, so again, this is not elected official, but election administrators and poll workers across the country who have been threatened by someone out there who thinks that this is a way to affect elections, election results. It's been covered, but I can tell you that in my role in EOLDN, we have seen requests for help from election officials all over the country from most states. So it is a widespread problem, and I'm so glad to be on this call today to tell you how you attorneys can step up and be part of their defense against this harassment, these threats, and this intimidation. And thank goodness that organizations such as my esteemed panelists are from as well, and the host of this call. We're all linking arms. We're working together on this. We want you to join us in this effort, and it will go through the election and into 2025 for sure. Because again, these are people that are often motivated by the results of the election, and we'll just have to wait and see what the results are. But there's a high likelihood that there will be people who are angry and they're going to take it out on election officials. With that, I will pause and we can move on through the agenda, but that's the problem. So soon we'll get to the solution. I hope you can join me, but we'll get to that in just a second. Thanks, Ashley.
Thank you, Angie. Both Angie, Sylvia, thank you for helping lay that groundwork. So folks kind of know like the starting point where we're coming from. And why that leads to some of the needs that we have right now. Which brings me to my next question. I know we're going to get into sort of more the nuts and bolts of like specific areas of like volunteer opportunities, whether that's litigation, election protection, helping election officials, but just anything else you want to share with the group about immediate needs right now. I know we've touched a little bit on like historically disenfranchised groups, other issue areas that tie into this, but anything else that folks want to share before we like get into the nitty gritty of how to get involved. All right, perfect. Let's do it. Let's dive in. So we're going to be talking about some specific areas. Like I mentioned, there are ways for volunteers to get involved with litigation, what we think of as traditional election protection opportunities, helping election officials. I'd love to kick it off to you, Nick, to start off talking about maybe you can tell us a little bit about like litigation, how folks can get involved there. That would be awesome.
For sure. Well, thank you, Ashley. I think it's no secret that there's just an insane amount of litigation happening around the country, and our attorneys at the Lawyers Committee are crisscrossing the nation and supporting a whole bunch of litigation, including some that we just recently filed here in Virginia. One thing that I want to talk most about for folks to get involved with litigation alongside the legal partners who are doing that is that there are a lot of pieces to being involved in litigation, and the amount of support that brings things to the courtroom is often unseen, but some of the most valuable parts. And so I know we're going to talk about volunteer opportunities, about being in the field. A lot of it, at its core, especially on election day, is identifying affected voters, receiving, their affidavits or their declarations to be used in court for additional legal action, either on election day or farther down the line. And so, to the extent that you're able to on election day, being a field volunteer, which I think we'll talk about more down the line, but there are a number of field legal programs across the country, including in Virginia, which is just across the river, that is at its core supposed to be about taking declarations from affected voters for that filing of litigation, which is enormously important. And then there's also another key piece when you look at, once again, this case in Virginia that we have about a National Voter Registration Act violation, is there's a list of purged voters that need to be contacted, whose affidavits then need to be collected and used in court. Who better than attorneys to talk to these folks and walk them through the process? There are similar situations across the country where we just need boots on the ground to be able to talk to these voters as these cases move forward. Because I don't think we're in a position to, send pro bono folks right into the courtroom. But there's a lot of moving parts when it comes to supporting the evidence and getting the witnesses and the affected voters into the flux of things. And I think that that's one of the areas where we most need assistance leading up to, on, and then after election day. So I'm happy to, share some links about some good folks to get involved with in Virginia, in DC, and Maryland, but then also, across the country, because a lot of these opportunities can be done remotely if you're doing phone banking or if you're assisting with just reviewing legal materials and other things like that. So I would say that, there's a lot of moving parts leading up to election day. There's cases that are nearing their end, but then there's cases who are just beginning. And so there's never really an opportunity where we don't need additional folks to support the legal movement that's happening here. And so I think that that's probably the biggest area where folks can make an impact, because we just received a list of a couple thousand voters who were purged in Virginia, and I don't have all the time in the day to call them all. And I know that my attorneys don't either. And, having trusted, skilled folks that we know can make those calls and move the ball forward on that is one of the biggest pieces on the legal and litigation side that comes to mind.
Thanks, Nick. Angie, would you be willing to talk a little bit about just generally helping election officials?
Oh, gladly. So I was writing down a whole bunch of notes with Nick's comments about how people can help. This service that we provide to election officials is legal representation and general guidance for election officials who have been threatened, harassed, or intimidated on the job, and it's in their individual capacities. And I wanted to stress that because we do not need lawyers who know a lot of election law, not even close. Election law usually does not enter into the type of help that these election officials are seeking. Here are a couple of scenarios that we tend to see over and over again that election officials tell us that they're dealing with. Threats and harassment from members of the public from every medium you can think of, as I mentioned. Perhaps they have people that they work with or for. So these are also people involved in election administration, but they are coming at this from a partisan angle, and they are not necessarily following the election rules to the letter. As I'm sure a lot of you already know, like states and counties run elections. It's very decentralized, and there are differences among election rules in these jurisdictions. Each election administrator, they know these rules like the back of their hand because that's their job. There may be a partisan actor that comes into their world by being appointed to a board of supervisors. You know, they become a supervisor, or maybe they have won an election to be a commissioner, right? But these people come in with these partisan notions on how elections could be run differently. And they start asking or telling or suggesting or hinting or however, whatever the degree is, to these election officials who are just professionals trying to run the election. Wouldn't it be better if we ignored why? Now the election official is in a quandary, and they may say to us, I don't know how to maneuver this situation with this pressure that I'm getting and keep my job. And in that case, we'll probably look for an employment lawyer to help them. And then finally, this is terrible, but because of some of these laws that have been passed in states post 2020, the profession of election administration has become more micromanaged. I only say that because that is in contrast to a lot of the discretionary work that election administrators were able to do almost always on behalf of the voters who they're serving. And some of those discretionary decisions have been taken away, like sending out absentee ballots without being asked. That's a crime in a couple of states now, just to send it. So because of this, we also have a need for criminal and civil defense assistance. But I want to expand it even broader and say it's attorneys who can give general guidance on a situation and are willing to talk to an election official and say, tell me what happened to you. Because Ashley and everyone else on the call, our requests tell us that about half of the election officials who have asked us for help have never told anyone that they work with that they're being harassed and interfered with and intimidated. They desperately want a safe space. They want their own lawyer. That's why I'm so happy to be on this panel. And I'll certainly give some more nitty-gritty responses to frequently asked questions that I get later on in our run of show as we speak with you all. But I just wanted to tell everyone, like, this is on an individual basis. It is nonpartisan work because we'll help any election official who finds themselves in this quandary. We don't rule people out on that and never will. We'll find them a lawyer to talk to. And I hope that as a result of this panel today, you feel like stepping up, raising your hand and saying, yes, I'd like to be on call for election officials in my jurisdiction. Thank you.
Thanks, Angie. And next up, I would love to talk about what we think of as traditional election protection opportunities. I think a lot of lawyers and law students think of that when they think about like volunteering, like before on election day. But for those who aren't as familiar, maybe we can talk about like specifically like what is sort of like election protection, like on the ground, or is it virtual? Are there opportunities for both? And Sylvia, I don't know if you would want to kick us off on that conversation.
Sure. Thanks so much. So election protection, the term, election protection, which I don't know what that means anymore, since it's being used by people who want to undermine the election, has traditionally been known by two main staples. One is a nonpartisan free hotline, 866-R-VOTE, that is run nationwide and staffed. The phone lines are staffed by attorneys across the country. So it's all lawyers or law students. You are kind of trained on that. You're assigned a state, you're trained on that state law, but you are to Angie's point, like the voter needs somebody to talk to and say, hey, this does not sound right. Is this what should be happening? And ensuring that, you know, they are able to vote a ballot that that is counted if they're an eligible voter. So they're kind of, you know, there are two sides to that hotline, I would say. Number one is interacting with the voter and really, you know, helping them figure out the way to be able to vote a ballot that counts. And the second part of that is knowing and recognizing when there is something that is a pattern, or there's something that we can do something about. And that's when having the lawyer and law students, you know, I always say, like, we spend our whole, you know, time in law school doing, you know, issue spotting. And so like that's what we want you to do here. We want you to, you know, recognize when there's an issue that we can pass over to the litigation team, usually, which is led by lawyers committee, which is where Nick's at. And so that they can do something about it. Right. So this can be, you know, I think thinking specifically about the last election, I believe it was a lawyers committee attorney on the hotlines that identified that, or that received notice that somebody called and said that at this polling place in Texas, they were only asking Black voters for their ID. And I think I remember immediately Ezra at the lawyers committee going into court and getting an injunction against that. So recognizing that when somebody calls, helping them, but also knowing when to escalate. And then the second part is our on-the-ground poll monitoring program. Same idea, but you're in person, right? You're in front of a polling location we've identified as having need, right? That could be because there's a history of problems there, could be because there's a large, you know, non-English speaking population, right? And they need to know that they can have help. They can take somebody in the voting booth with them, that to you know, to translate for them. That there's, or, you know, we're around a campus, right? Anywhere where there are vulnerable communities, and also likely to be, you know, misunderstandings about election law. Because there might be some, you know, something different, right? Not everybody might know that, like, that, you know, you hear I hear all the time people who are non-English speakers or not fluent English speakers saying that, like, they told them that I couldn't bring somebody in to help me translate. Well, that's against the law. So, so having those people outside polling locations and kind of accompanying that is kind of different programs depending on where you are. So I love our, you know, our Florida program has a legal attorney partnership with the Disability Rights Florida. So not only are the attorneys helping voters, they're also checking disability access, right? They're doing things with, you know, making sure that there are, gosh, I am not I do not know disability law, but there are things about, like, how wide the doors have to be, and that there has to be, you know, like a ramp, and there has to be an open door, and all of those things. And that's an amazing thing, you know, that we can do, that we could use our kind of the attorneys in a joint way to meet the needs of this community. And that's the kind of thing you'll see across the country in terms of our on-the-ground programs. They'll be slightly different to meet the needs of the community. But it is, you know, to what makes it, like, we can't do our work without the eyes on the ground, right? There's no way. There's a group of us who do this work 24/7, and we are just, you know, kind of like the tip of the iceberg, right? You can't take 100 lawyers and get them to 10,000 polling locations across the country. But with this team and with all our pro bono help, we can. So we greatly appreciate it.
And then digging into that a little deeper, for these on the ground volunteer experiences, what does a volunteer shift look like? What's sort of the commitment? And I guess Sylvia and Nick, you can both chime in with that.
Yeah, I can give you kind of general, and maybe Nick can talk a little bit more about Virginia, since he's like the Virginia guru. It can be anything, really. That's the reality. We will take whatever you can give, right? If you want to be there for 3 hours, awesome. If you feel like spending 15-hour days, which I did once, and it is not fun, but it is very rewarding, right? You can do that. Do you want to be in one location? Would you like to rove? Are you somebody who wants to interact with voters, or would you rather be apart, rather not engage with voters one-on-one? Well, then maybe we will ask you to be in a car, drive around to different locations, make sure the signage is all right, that there is Spanish language signs where there need to be, that the parking lot is accessible, that there's not a gigantic line of voters, right? So the reality is that we can we can make the volunteer shift whatever it needs to be for you to engage with us. We're not as, and we are happy to do so. And maybe Nick can talk a little bit about Virginia specifically.
Sure. Yeah. Virginia, of course, there are other states around the DC area. I think that we focus in on Virginia just because it has one of the more robust and active programs. But it's largely as Sylvia described it. If you've got time to give, there is a place that you can plug in and get involved. They have, similar to Florida, a legal volunteer program where they get trained specifically in taking declarations from affected voters, are briefed on the election laws so that they can feel comfortable doing that. They're supervised very closely by attorneys on the team. And, I think we talk a lot about pro bono and firm opportunities, but one of the largest recruiters for that Virginia legal program is the University of Virginia and law students, and deploying them across Virginia, which is really wonderful because, they're getting involved and they're getting field experience very early on, which I think is just so unparalleled. And then, about the hotline itself, staffing the hotline, like Sylvia said, is one of the most important things that we do, and the hotline is open year round. So I know that we're getting to year round opportunities. I see it in my notes, Ashley, but it's another one of those things where if you've got time to give, and you're willing to be trained and you're willing to help people, that there's an opportunity for you to make that difference. I've seen so many hotline calls that, especially as we reach the stage where voter registration deadlines and mail ballot request deadlines, it is the difference between someone being able to vote this year and not being able to vote, because they called the hotline and they got a quick answer because we were fully staffed up. And especially, as this election subsides, there's special elections, there's primaries, there's more elections next year, and they don't have the same kind of coordinated voter education opportunities. They don't have the same amount of money or resources being put in to make sure that all the voters are well informed by their election officials' offices, just because of the boom and bust of the cycle. And so that's where the hotline could play an outsized impact on making sure that voters are able to access the ballot and report problems. And so I would just say, now is a great time to do it. And I'll drop the link to get involved in volunteering with the hotline. But once you start to build that muscle, it's also a really great year-round opportunity. And then when the next presidential rolls around, think of how trained and how experienced you'll be. So I'll just say that those are some really great opportunities. And I dropped a link from We the Action that sort of compiles all of these different opportunities, from poll monitoring to the hotlines, to other, legal and litigation volunteering opportunities in the chat. So I hope that you all find that useful as well.
And I want to pop in because I forgot to mention, which is so important, the other hotlines that are for non-English speakers. So there are, I think, the last 8 or 9 different Asian hotline languages that are covered. There is a Spanish language hotline, there is an Arabic hotline. So if you are an attorney who is bilingual and feels comfortable speaking with voters in another language, those hotlines absolutely, obviously, they have there's less of a pool of people that they can pull from. So definitely would love, and they are run by partners across the spectrum. Asian Americans Advancing Justice runs the Asian hotlines. I believe NALEO runs the Spanish hotline, and Arab American Institute runs the Arabic hotline. So, and we will, I think that information should also be in the on the We the Action website, but just wanted to highlight that.
Thanks for that, Sylvia. So now that we've talked about all these different opportunities, how to get involved, and I'm sure there are folks who are asking, who specifically are you looking for specific types of people for specific opportunities? So let's generally throw out there for the things you've talked about. What sort of experience is needed for your volunteers, and is there training available for folks who want to get involved?
I can tackle what works for my project. I see that there's been a question in the chat about it, so I'll cover that as well as some other needs and eligibility requirements for EOLDN. So the Election Official Legal Defense Network, as I mentioned, was built to help defend election officials. And the way that we are able to run this program across the whole nation with me and my team of 2 people is that we rely heavily on the existing experience of the attorneys in our network. We've done that the whole time. That said, the Colorado Lawyers Committee made us a 15-minute training video, which has all the nuts and bolts of what to expect and who we need. And it's great. And I'm going to provide that link to be given to all of you attendees, so you can watch that later at your leisure. But let me address a few of those points now. Number 1, actively practicing lawyers. So I do apologize to the people on the call who are maybe in the academic world, they're not practicing right now, maybe they're students, but I hope someday you are able to join us. But for now, in this moment where election officials will ask us for help, and sometimes it's pretty urgent. We got 2 requests in August from people one person who was about to be arrested in like 4 hours, and then someone else who was about to be possibly, and I think that did happen, actually disciplined by his board of supervisors, and he needed someone to go to court with him the very next day. So we do need people who are actively practicing. They need to be in good standing with their bar. They need to be insured. So this is the question that we got in the QA about this. Great question. At this time, we do ask our participating attorneys to carry their own insurance, but we are looking at a way to offer insurance to at least solo practitioners who aren't, covered by a firm's umbrella policy, and maybe their coverage falls short or whatever the issue is. So I would ask you to stay tuned on that. That has caused a fair amount of people to say, I don't qualify, and that stinks. We don't like that. But we do need to make sure that everyone is protected through the insurance. We also ask for at least a 3-year amount of experience practicing law. 3 and 4 if you're supervised. If it's 5 and up, you're good to go. That's because we promise our election officials that when we match them up with someone, that they will get experienced attorneys. So we do hold to that. And again, we've had people sign up and maybe they've got 2 years, and we say, well, in a year, we'll call you. So, we've got all this in the database that we have, and we can work with you. And I just want to also mention this work is year round. I'm skipping ahead perhaps slightly, but I'm going to go ahead and tackle it now. This work is year round because elections are year round. The election administration profession works year round. Even in communities that maybe don't have elections on a frequent, let's just call it that, schedule. For instance, so I live in Denver. We end up having an election every year. That's a minimum. Sometimes it's 3, and if you add in runoffs and things like that, the election officials are stretched pretty thin, but that's the job. They do it. It's year round. They get harassed year round because people who are out for them keep it up. It is their axe to grind, and they keep grinding that axe. Sometimes an election official has been harassed for months or years, but then they find out that the service is available, and then they ask us to match them with a lawyer. And if it's in August, they're going to ask us then. So if you join us, and I hope that you do, we may call on you at any time. And this is something that you can just be part of their support network. think of all of us as supporting the entire profession. Because there are people who have quit. They say, I didn't sign up for this. This is not the highest paying job in the world. And before 2020, it was pretty, staid and predictable, and all of that's good. Now it's haywire in some places, and they have a hot spotlight. So that we want lawyers all over the country. And when we get to the call to action part, I'll tell you more about who it is we seek all over the country. It's not just you on the call. I'm going to ask you to go out and evangelize for all of our projects, but especially mine. But those are some of the basic requirements. And I also want to tell you, we do not help poll watchers at the behest of a party. So if people are there in their capacity by a party because they've been assigned to go watch, they can find their own lawyers. The service is not for them. And we have said no to people like that before, but I want to make that distinction between poll workers who are, being told what to do by the election administrators in their county, in their rooms, versus the poll watchers or anyone really that's acting on the behest of a party. Like, the service is not for them. So you can rest assured that we would not be asking you to help someone with a partisan allegiance such as that. It would be an election worker. So thank you.
So election protection is slightly different. So you are not creating an attorney-client relationship with any of the people that you are assisting. So answering hotline calls or providing assistance to voters outside polling locations. So for that reason, we do look for, we are open for law students, lawyers, people who are waiting for bar results, any of those individuals. So happy to have you.
And what about, I know we have a question in the chat, but then also we were going to mention this as well. Obviously for law students who, aren't out of school yet or licensed, or those who are still waiting to get bar results, or even folks, who are in a government capacity. What sorts of opportunities in election protection are available for those folks, or is everything available for them? Or is there a distinction between who you would want to have on a hotline, who you'd want to have on the ground?
Yeah, I'm happy to take it, Sylvia. No, I think Sylvia hit the nail on the head there. If you're somewhere on your journey, I think that there's somewhere in the movement for you, which is really great. And then one thing that I'll just say as we talk about, I think everyone here does a phenomenal job at training and preparing their volunteers and being with them every step of the way, which can feel really scary when you're going out into the field and you've got these things on your shoulder about protecting the voting rights movement. But I think that the training and the materials always prepares folks to be successful and to make a difference. But one thing that I think is really invaluable about having field volunteers, and that you can't quite train, but that we always look for, is having an immense amount of empathy and responsibility when you're out in the field. Whether you're answering the hotline or you're at a polling location, you're encountering these voters at a very vulnerable moment when they are being denied access to a fundamental right for themselves. And so being able to be understanding and, of course, be frustrated at the situation, but, to be that primary support, legally, but also emotionally, is really, really important. And so, I think that that's what makes the voting rights movement so special, is because it is powered by those folks who do have that empathy. And that's one of the primary things that we look for when we build those relationships, is being able to connect with them at that human level as well.
I love that. Thanks, Nick, for reinforcing that idea that, we really are here to help other people and be that support for them, and ultimately to make this, a good experience, have someone that they can trust that can help them throughout that. So I love it. And before we move on to the next question, I know, Sylvia, this has come up with us as we have talked before, but in case folks have any questions also about, does it matter where they're licensed?
Again, not for our purposes, for election protection purposes. We are using lawyers and law students because they have the skills that we need, but since we're not creating an attorney-client relationship, it's not necessary to be barred in a particular state or any state. I would say probably if you've been disbarred for malpractice, we might you might look elsewhere, but I think otherwise.
Perfect. I love it. Anyone can get involved. Okay, so next question is, since obviously this is for DC Pro Bono Week, we're talking to folks who are in the DC metro area. Are there priority volunteer locations for folks who are here locally, who want to get involved right now for the election?
So I want to say one thing, which is I know that this is DC Pro Bono Week, so I know we are, you know, this is the location we're in, but just kind of as a general plug, we need help everywhere and not just limited to the swing states or the states that, you know, Elon Musk is giving people money to go to register. You know, no election administration is perfect. And we are not there to play gotcha like the people Angie might have, you know, sort of alluded to. But we want to make sure that people have access to the ballot and, you know, races. There are other races that affect people's lives at a, you know, on a huge level that are not the presidency. And so always a plug for, you know, being in the non-sexy, my boss hates when I say that, but the non-sexy locations.
I will say on the EOLDN front, there's no such thing as a unsexy location. They're all highly sexy. So I echo Sylvia, like we seek help throughout the entire country. We do need extra help in the swing states because we do think there's going to be, so this is my all-purpose word for this stuff, kerfuffle. Such a sweet word for such terrible things that happen, but that's how I euphemize it. So kerfuffles. We want all of you to consider signing up. One of the things we understand with this pro bono project that I'm now running is that, you know, lawyers join and sign up all the time, but when we do ask them for help, sometimes they're unavailable. And I want to tell all of you that. We know that. We know that people are busy, they have conflicts, it's a bad time, whatever. If you tell us no, we'll say, thank you so much for your consideration, and we'll just move right through the database and find other people in that jurisdiction with the right experience for this person who asked us for help. But to be able to do that, we need bulk, we need depth. So everyone, please, not only should you consider it, but you should tell your concerned contacts all over the country that this is something that you can do. In addition to all the other projects and organizations on this panel, this is something you can commit to and feel good. You are doing your part.
And then that brings me to my next question, which is, we're 2 weeks away from Election Day. Is it too late to plug in? I'm assuming not, because we're having a panel right now. But if you can explain to everyone tuning in what ways they can get involved right
Yeah,
now.
not at all. So here's the reality is, we know that people think about how to get involved 2 weeks before the election. So we have trainings, and we are, you know, still assigning people to polling locations. We are doing that right up to, you know, as late as we can. And then there might be, depending again on location, all that post-election work. So things like observing the canvas monitoring. And that's a place where I think people, EOLDN is probably going to need a large amount of people as well, because we anticipate there being, my word is shenanigans, but similarly kerfuffle shenanigans. It's, you know, so we absolutely are happy to have you now. And, you know, we will talk about how to get involved year round, but just because we are the last 2 weeks does not mean that we are closed up. We are still open for business.
Yeah, I mean, to add on to that, that's absolutely right. I echo that. And I have outreach plans for attorneys going into January and into February. So this is actually kind of early if you look at it that way. So congratulations for being on the cutting edge of what's needed for elections. And yes, you should sign up.
And then I know we've touched on this a little bit throughout the conversation as well, but that springboards us into these. It is not over. after election day, right? There are going to continue to be opportunities right after the election, coming out of the election. And then, like you have also pointed out, I mean, every year is really an election year, especially when we're talking about so many states also that have, off year elections, those sorts of things. So, what are ways also that people can get involved? Let's maybe start out with like opportunities for, we're talking immediate post-election. And once again, we're highlighting those nonpartisan opportunities immediately post-election, and then maybe thinking about then, even opportunities into next year.
Yeah, I can jump in. The Canvas monitoring operation, in addition to there's the Canvas, there's counting, if that's sometimes different, there's the certification, if that's sometimes different. So a lot of meetings. And oftentimes, these happen first at the local level, county by county. So you look at, Virginia has 133 localities. That's 133 meetings that would be good to have eyes on. And the same is for, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, which I know have robust Canvas and counting monitoring efforts. And so often those are not very transparent. They are not streamed anywhere like you might see a statewide meeting for, and that's why they need eyes on the ground. Sometimes it's just looking for things and reporting back. Some programs are really great and they train you about how to object to certain, if they try to throw out a bunch of provisional ballots for no reason, or if there are any issues, how to advocate on behalf of those voters. So it's a real good mix and match about what's available. I'll say that, I have 3 states that I'm responsible for: Virginia, North Carolina, Pennsylvania. They gave me the easy ones, I know. And so I'll say, if you're willing to take a drive up to Pennsylvania, I can guarantee you that they have a need for you after the election. And it happens in that pivotal, 1 to 2 weeks right after the election, when things are extremely messy and they just need a steady, volunteer base. They need those steady eyes and hands who can watch and monitor amidst the chaos. And so especially if you're willing to travel, but I imagine that there are a number of other opportunities that Sylvia and Angie know about as well.
I thought I'd just add one additional point. I know that I've made it pretty clear. Like, we want people to sign up and then be with us for the duration. We hope that this project that I lead can go away. I hope I never have to contact any of you on this call, assuming that you sign up, which I hope you do. But we're ready. We're ready for whatever's coming. You're what makes us ready. But 2025, that might be lots of kerfuffles and shenanigans too. So just the ability for you all to say, I'm available to chat with an election official who needs a confidential space to talk to, like, that's invaluable, and it does keep people on the job. I don't know if I made that point plain. Election administration is year-round. The need to support them is year-round. And if it means that someone gets to have a confidential conversation and say, okay, so-and-so in my community has been bothering me via a blog, via text message. They know where my kids go to school, and they told me that. One time they confronted me outside of my door when I was walking out. Like, what the hell can I do? The attorney will help them. You can help them. So we do seek anyone, who can give general guidance, or if you're comfortable learning how to, or you have done a personal protective order, temporary restraining order, that's very useful. So I'm trying to make it very plain that we do seek a wide variety of people. And yes, the ability to be ongoing, and that's your choice, but if you're ongoing support for an election official in your area, like, they know they can call you and you will give them free advice. Equitable relief and free advice is all that we ask our attorneys to do. We do not ask them to mount damages claims or start costly litigation. So if the election officials know, I've got someone in my corner and I can talk to them, you're supporting elections in this country. And if you support election administration, you're supporting the voters, you're supporting democracy.
Yeah, I love that emphasis. That obviously all of this is like essentially going to support voters, supporting democracy, power democracy, make sure things run well in the way they should. And once again, the emphasis that this is year-round work. And I know, Sylvia, I think you also mentioned like the hotlines are also year-round. And there are just so many things that, you know, to folks to keep in mind that this is just something that there's always a need for folks to help out with.
Yeah, absolutely. We have, so I think as has often been the case, people sort of, it's like the Olympics, you only care about fencing every 4 years. But between that, you could not name a fencer, right? And that seems to be how people feel often who aren't in the space think about elections. They don't realize how much is going on. So often a lot of the bad stuff is happening in the off years when there's less attention. And I hate using the word off years, but in the in the ones and threes. But so, you know, so we need people to go to Board of Elections meetings, which happen year round, and to observe what's happening. What are they trying to pass bad policies? Are they, you know, what is happening on the ground? And you know, I'll put in a plug for, we also need people to be part of the solution, be advocating, you know, for or against bad stuff. Or well, against bad stuff for good stuff. That that's a little bit more C4 work, but people are needed year round.
Thanks. And I think it would be really great to sort of round out this conversation by just sharing any success stories that you've had of pro bono volunteers helping out who've really made a difference.
Me. This is something I jotted down, and this is the perfect time to cover it. Okay. So We the Action has been mentioned a couple of times on this call. We the Action has been the best partner for EOLDN, and I know for hundreds of other nonprofits, to connect legal professionals with, you know, worthy nonprofit causes. EOLDN actually has been featured in Pro Bono Week. There was an email that went out yesterday, and it was highlighting one of our volunteers. And it was a fellow named Gene Farber in Michigan. And that's a story that we felt like we could tell as long as we didn't identify the election official or what happened to them. You know, that was an example of like highlighting an attorney and saying, good work, attorney. So we're happy to do that all day long. And we have helped election officials, and we were not the only ones, my goodness, not even close, but we were part of the support that they got when they needed it, and they're still on the job, and some of them have risen to high positions in their states, such as Lisa Mera of Arizona. She was the director of Cochise County. Now she's the state election director, in part because she got free legal advice from EOLDN when she was being harassed by members of her board. And this is all public, so no worry there. But that's I think the highest calling here, is saying we're supporting the profession. And like I said, we've helped dozens of people. Now, some of them did leave for whatever reason, probably because of somewhat from harassment. But the fact that you can help, and this is actually a quick opportunity for me to address a question I get all the time, if you will indulge me for 30 seconds. A lot of attorneys say to me, and rightfully so, aren't the municipal attorneys supposed to be helping them with all these problems? Aren't the county and the maybe state AGs helping them? Sometimes, yeah. Sometimes they do help them. And that's what's supposed to happen. And we welcome that. We're happy about that. But like I said, half of the people that ask us for help haven't told anyone. And they definitely haven't told the lawyers that they work with or for or alongside. They haven't told them. They don't want to. They don't want to share it. That's a whole host of reasons. Mistrust. Maybe the attorney is retiring and doesn't care anymore. We've seen lots of reasons why attorneys in the municipal and the county level have said, maybe they say, I don't have the expertise to help you, whatever. EOLDN is here too. Like we're kind of filling in those gaps. So That's something else that you're doing, is providing this extra legal layer of assistance for these people who really should stay on the job for us.
Any other success stories folks want to share?
I mean, honestly, it's like it is hard to have one, right? That like the reality is that we wouldn't know what was happening unless somebody on the ground was there and told us so that we could do something about it. So, yeah, I mean, there are lovely stories about, a voter who went to a hospital, a volunteer lawyer who went to a hospital to help to get an emergency ballot to help somebody vote and then turned it in, but the reality is it's everywhere. Every single person who engages helps voters in some way or another.
Perfect. Amazing. So just in case, is there anything else that we haven't covered that would be important to mention that you would like to share with the group?
I just want to note and observe that despite the horror of 2020 and what has come after, the amount of visibility into elections overall has been a very good thing. The fact that the public is paying more attention, as long as they are civil, which most of them are, but some aren't, this is a really good thing. And supporting all of this knowledge and education and advocacy, wherever that happens, I can certainly reference it, even though we don't do that. No one on the call does that, I don't believe. But just the fact that more lawyers and legal professionals and interested people across the country are saying, really, I should pay more attention to this. I need to know a little bit more about how elections are run in my state. That's good. That's really good. So let's just keep growing our I guess our audience in the legal community and related areas to say, don't take your eyes off this just because the elections, concludes and we declare winners. Let's stay in this for the long haul. And I hope that as a result of this call, some of you have become more convinced of the need to just be more civically aware and then to inspire the people that we talk to every day to do the same so we can all get it and understand it and support it the best way that we can.
Amazing. Thank you. And I know we've covered a few of the questions that we got in the chat, the Q&A box, but I know there's still one in the chat from Kathy asking about how all of our different groups coordinate with each other. Does someone want to take that?
Yeah. So what I was remiss at saying at the top is that election protection as a program nationwide includes, I think the latest number was over 400 organizations. So when I say election protection, I'm saying the entire kind of like nonpartisan election focused or civic engagement focused community in a state. So that is how, I mean, we are all coordinating. It depends on the state. It might differently, right? Some might be like, oh, you take those counties, we'll take this county. Others might say, oh, you guys will do the hotline, we'll do the on the ground, right? But in general, it is a group effort everywhere. And this is separate from, like whatever partisan things are happening. We're not part of that, but we are always collaborating together to ensure that we are using our resources in the best way to serve as many voters as possible.
Thanks for answering that, Sylvia. I think that answers all of the questions that we got from our audience members. And so I just want to sort of conclude the end of this with a few things. First of all, just to thank all of you for this amazing panel discussion. I know this is a very busy season, so I very much appreciate you taking the time away from your organizations to share all this information with our attendees. And I very much want to make sure that we end with a call to action, because obviously the whole point of this panel is to get people to volunteer and to get involved. And so I really quickly want to turn it over to Wilson at We the Action. We've already had some amazing shout outs to We the Action, and it's really such a great hub where you can sign up to get involved with all of this. And so I will quickly turn it over to you, Wilson.
Thank you, Ashley, and thank you to all the panelists. I know several of you have heard about We the Action during this call, and that we've dropped a link to the election protection guide in the chat. I will put it in one more time. We'll also be sending out links following this call. This guide has a variety of options, whether you're looking for remote, on-site, election day, post-election day opportunities. It'll have something for you, including opportunities with the organizations of our panelists today. For those of you in the DMV area, I wanted to share an opportunity that we have right now with the Virginia Civic Engagement Table to be a Virginia election protection legal advocate. I will go ahead and drop that in the chat as well, just in case you're pulling the links live. And then the important thing too is if you want to be one of the first to be notified when post-election opportunities arise, I'm going to also share a link to We the Action's Voter Vanguard campaign. By signing up for this, when election opportunities come to us and volunteers are needed, this is exactly the first, you will be the first to be notified of these opportunities when they hit our platform. If you have questions about any of these opportunities or election protection work generally, we are also happy to always have a conversation to try to find something for you. But these are some of the ways to get involved. I do encourage everyone to look at that guide and help several of these organizations doing really great work in these states.
Thanks so much, Wilson. Thanks again to everyone. I'm also going to drop a link in the chat also to Protect the Vote, which is Common Cause's direct sign up, where you can also sign up there as well. Like we said in the chat as well, we will send out these links to everyone. There will be a follow-up email. There will be so much that you can dive into. We hope that you all get involved, and I will turn it back over to Chris to wrap it up. Thanks again, everyone.
Thank you so much to everyone who is in attendance and participated in this incredible panel. Thank you so much to our panelists for all the wonderful information that you shared and the opportunities that you shared. DC Pro Bono Week is still ongoing. We are having another conversation about the election later this evening called Mobilizing After the Election, which will focus on specific substantive areas that we think that volunteers will be absolutely needed regardless of who wins. So not just protecting our democracy, but protecting those that are in our democracy as well. We hope to see you there. We will also have more events throughout the week. I will put the schedule of events here in the chat. Feel free to check it out, and whatever calls to you, we hope to see you there. These events all end with a call to action about ways to get involved with pro bono opportunities. So we hope that you get involved. We heard of a lot of incredible pro bono opportunities with this panel, and I hope that you follow up with our panelists to see how you can throw your hat in the ring. Like everyone said, we will be putting the links in the follow-up email. We will be putting emails in the follow-up email, so you will be able to get in contact with these wonderful folks again and get involved with all of the opportunities that they mentioned. And thank you again so much for joining us today, and I hope to see you at our later events. This concludes our program. Have a fantastic day.